Hey everybody, this is Tony Gray from the Opinionated Security Podcast. Welcome to episode 7. Today's episode is about measuring cyber program success, and it's focused primarily on Infosec program engagement, which is how Infosec teams and programs interact with their close stakeholders and business units in a way that can be made more successful. This is the second in a series of videos in which I plan to demonstrate to senior cyber practitioners how to produce a simple program narrative and metrics for various parts of Infosec and cyber programs that have historically been difficult to measure. Engagement is one of those, and how your team engages in a structured, formal way that can be measured is probably a topic that you haven't heard much about before. So please remember that although I am a CISO, I'm probably not your CISO. So, just don't take anything that I have to say as legal or regulatory advice. Please involve your own leadership and authorities within your own organization to make the best decisions for your own organization. I'm just an opinionated guy on the internet trying to think through and help people apply new knowledge that probably doesn't have a lot of thought leadership around it. And, because of that, I'm not speaking on behalf of my current employer or any past employers, and any and all opinions that I express are strictly my own. This presentation is primarily an attempt to answer the question of how to measure the success of Infosec engagement at the program level and also at the team level, the individual team level. And we're going to present an alternative model to use that describes the program narrative around Infosec engagement. We'll talk about why current approaches don't work for Infosec engagement. Because engagement is such a conceptual topic, we'll also touch on key definitions, taxonomy, and constructs that are essential to understanding Infosec engagement. I'll also try to provide you a new way to think about the engagement cycle that probably you haven't seen before because I made it myself. And then we'll also talk about how to measure Infosec engagement at both the individual team level and at the Infosec program level. Traditional Infosec engagement is probably best described as informal and not structured. That's what makes it so hard to measure. If your CFO came to you and said, what are some of the tools that you use to engage with other business units, and what's the value that those things provide? You might talk about things like your security awareness training, but beyond that, there may not be a lot of other measurable, tangible things that you can talk about that aren't basically, one time we had this discussion with this group or this other group. Today we're going to talk about doing this in a structured way. And in order to understand what structured looks like, we have to understand what the traditional conversation is like. And so that conversation normally goes something like this. There's a business unit or a close stakeholder that wants to do something. The Department of No, known as the Infosec program, says, no, you can't do that. And then one of two things generally happens. There's some defensive that's involved. The business unit may say, oh yes, we can do that. They bring it up their chain, it comes back down to the Infosec organization, and the word from above is, we're going to do that. So the team wanted to do X, you said no, the team does X anyway. The alternative is that the team says, oh yeah, okay, you say no, they say, oh, we're not going to do it, all good, and then they either ignore that completely or they accept the risk or do something else, which essentially allows them to do X just like they said they would at the beginning, despite you saying no. So that model isn't working. That model isn't working either for the Infosec organization, it's not working for the business units, and it's certainly not working for your organization as a whole in terms of meeting security objectives. Since engagement is a concept that has deep roots in definition and in taxonomy, let's start out with some definitions that matter here. The first thing is that if we want to be serious about the way that we measure engagement, we need to treat engagement as a business process. If we treat engagement as a business process, we can talk about it and measure it just like any other business process. So in order to be a business process, we need to make sure that it's interactive so that we don't get into this always being in the position of having to say no. We actually can enable teams to do the things that they want to do with less risk, and accomplish the overall security objectives of the organization. One quick item to mention is that security engagement is very different from security awareness training. Security engagement is generally interactive, and we're working with people with other teams to accomplish their objectives. Security awareness training is generally one way in nature. Yeah, there may be some interactivity because you're touching a couple of radio buttons, but it is generally a message that does not allow, in a format that does not allow the user to provide feedback as to what friction may be involved with this, how they should prioritize this within their organization. But in order to do that, we have to establish some level of formality around how we interact with various business units, so that we have consistency across all of the teams, whether they be a contracts team as a business unit or they are the infrastructure team. If we are able to get that formality at a level of abstraction that works for all business units and close stakeholders, now we're forming the basis of being able to measure the interaction and the quality of the interaction that we have. And lastly, as I talked about, it needs to be in a structured way. And what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to measure individual team level progress, and then roll that progress up collectively across all of the teams that either we are engaging with or we want to engage with, so that we're able to actually give executives a view of our level of engagement across the entire organization throughout the enterprise. So now that we've been through the traditional method of security engagement, how should we think about, or how can we think about this in a different way? How can we think about this in a different way and ensure that not only are we interacting, but we are prioritizing together and coming to agreements, which then can turn into plans that we work together as two separate organizations, but perhaps working from a common backlog in order to work through the items that need to be worked through for your org. Next, there's obviously execution. In many cases, it's not the security teams that are doing the execution. They're just facilitating that execution and measuring the quality of that execution. And if we're doing this right, we can look at the quality of the engagement itself from the measurements that we take, and then we can actually improve the quality of the interactions that we get as we work towards common goal. So instead of just being a circle like you may see with cyber threat intelligence or some of the other circular type models, this actually measures progress in terms of a helix or a coil, in which as we go through each cycle, because we are measuring what is happening and then making adjustments, we actually move forward with each rotation. And the conceptual idea of moving forward with each rotation translates into deepening the engagement that the Infosec program has with a given team. So again, the easiest conceptual construct for thinking about engagement is kind of a pipeline. So, pipeline has a tube that, is a tube or a pipe that that has to be structured a certain way against the elements and for a certain distance. And there's really two parts of it. There's the outer shell, which forms the structural way that whatever is moving through the pipeline moves, and then there is whatever moves through the inside of the pipeline. So if we're going to apply this to engagement, we may make some measurements around, do we have the right structure in place for successful engagements? And then also, do we have the right quality of information that is flowing through the pipeline that we have to a given team, or engagement that we have with a given team? If we can say yes to both consistently over time, now we're starting to have a construct that will provide us a way to measure engagement at the team level. So here I have an example of a team level measurement in which we're measuring three things. We're measuring coverage, we're measuring quality of engagement, and we're measuring the rhythm of engagement. And we have a small taxonomy set up of red, yellow, green. I know there's this whole set of people that don't like that, but these are qualitative measurements. And in this particular case, red means not engaged or no progress, needs improvement, or we're accomplishing our goals of that particular engagement, and we're actually making progress forward on the things that we need. So here's a pro tip. When we think about coverage, there's actually some things both from the infosec-centric view and from the business-centric view that you may want to consider. The first and probably the most important thing, I think that a shared backlog is what makes engagement different from just a random set of meetings. If you have a shared backlog with an organization in a known location, you are capturing the work items that then need to be prioritized into your plan. The other piece is, from an InfoSec-centric view, a backlog also ensures that we can cover the prerequisites, whatever prerequisites that are needed for a given InfoSec capability or objective that we may have on the part of the close stakeholder team or the business unit. And what we often don't think about, and part of the reason why a formal engagement model is so successful, is there are oftentimes very business-centric concerns that need to be included in our planning. And they may be things like competing business priorities. If you're not in a highly regulated organization, and those of you that work in a bank are probably thinking, yeah, but it's security, right? Got it. Understand. But in lesser regulated organizations, sometimes you have to compete with things like projects that are actually generating the revenue that allow the security team to exist. The other piece that we look at and that we ensure we want to address interactively is, in many cases, teams want to have the control in place, but there's some sort of obstructive tech debt that is limiting their ability to do it, either in the time frame that we need, or there are budget requirements or headcount requirements or specialized skill sets, services, whatever that are needed in order to remove that tech debt. So these are conversations that we have to have as far as putting the plan together. In my organizations, I also like to increase the formality of these meetings and increase the quality of the engagement by being sure that our risk register items for that given team are included in the discussion. So particularly the high and critical items that we have, ensuring that the risk owner knows that of their items that are on the risk register, critical and high items in my organization need to have risk treatment plans associated with it. And as part of that engagement, we're getting an understanding of what the risk treatment plan is, whether or not it's on track, those sorts of things. And this is part of the formal engagement meeting that we have, and it's part of the measure that we use to ensure that coverage includes the qualitative items that we feel are necessary for success in our particular organization. This may or may not work for your organization. I'm just, like I said, opining. So now that we have a way to measure individual team engagement, we can begin to look at these collectively and take each of those individual views and roll them up into what I call a program level engagement view. Now, what's important about this is, we may be measuring. It's equally important to measure the engagements that you are currently doing, as well as what I'll call aspirational engagements. If you're not engaging with teams that you need to be engaging with teams on, those need to be included in the measurement so that you can give a view of your overall engagement, good and bad. So now that we are able to take measurements at the individual team level, we can begin to actually roll those up and give a program view to consumers of the Infosec program, whether that be the Infosec team, vendors. It could be your quarterly meeting with the C-level executives, or perhaps even your annual level briefing with the board. You can begin to give them a view of your structured, measured, purposeful program around engaging other business units to avoid being the Department of No. Not only are you able to provide a qualitative definition of green, yellow, red, but it also gives them a view into where you are not engaging today, which to me opens the opportunity for questions around headcount and resourcing to ensure that those business units are being engaged with in the future. This also provides a clear opportunity for you to include engagement and perhaps show how engagement has influenced other measures and metrics that you have within your security program. I'm thinking specifically of phishing simulations, and other topics that you may cover individually with given teams. The results of those may also drive initiatives in the other direction. You may see that when you break down phishing simulation results by teams, that some teams are doing really well at those simulations and other teams are not. And so you can begin to drive, based on other data points that you have, specific messages into specific team engagements as part of that coverage and quality. And then once we have a snapshot, we can begin to compare snapshots over time. So this is just a snapshot of, if I were to make a monthly report that went up to the executive team, I could show what's been done in the prior month, what's done in the current month, and show that individual progress. But you can also compare with any other snapshot that you have. For instance, I think a very effective metric for, especially if your engagement isn't very mature at all, to show value is to show your comparative snapshot with your very first snapshot, the one where you had all those yellows and reds, and now you can show over time how those greens are filling in, and how much more effective that the engagements have become over time. And again, you can tie this back in with other measures other metrics and measures that you have in other parts of the organization. Thank you very much for the time that you've taken to consume this video to the end. If you do like the content, please subscribe. There's no better way to tell me that the time and effort that it takes for me to put these together is valuable than if you can hit the subscribe and like button for me. Again, This is going to be a continuing series as we move forward about how to measure things that you probably haven't thought a lot about measuring. Thanks again.